Hello world, welcome back to my channel. This is the next installment of the Introduction to Webflow course. In the last video, we set up the basics of Webflow and got familiar with the interface. Today, we'll dive into adding more complex elements like CSS grid for our layout, buttons, lists, and even some interactions to make the site come to life. Let's get started. So here's the reference that we'll be working off of. Like I said before, this is the site that we had previously, and this is the stuff that I added on to the end. So as you can see here, for the skills section, we have some buttons, and there's a slight hover interaction when you hover over these. And then this next project section utilizes both CSS grid and Flexbox to help you learn how to use layouts. So let's dive right in. Let's start by creating these buttons. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to add another div after this parent. So as you can see, last time we created a div for this sort of hero section. I can actually rename it that. So I'm going to go ahead and this div block that's right now called parent, I'm going to go ahead and rename that, call it hero instead, because that's our hero section. And I'm going to drag out another div, and I'm going to name this section because we're creating a new section on our page. So, okay. This section is going to be our skills section. So if we look back here, we have a heading first. So we can go ahead and we can grab a heading element. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, drop that right in there. And we can call this anything. I'm going to call this section heading because I feel like that's fitting. So section heading. This doesn't need to be an H1. Again, if you recall from last time, an H1 would be the most important heading on the entire site. And this is more of a H2 situation, I feel, so I'm just gonna bring that level down. And I'll call this skills. Okay. We can make the text size a little bit bigger, so I'm gonna go ahead and instead of making it 38 pixels, I might jump up to 45 and again increase the height with that, so I'll make that maybe 50. Okay, great. So that's our heading. Now to create this button sort of layout, what we're going to need to do is first we're going to have a div that holds all of them, and this is going to be a flex div, so it's going to have like layout settings applied to it because we want a grouping for all these buttons. So I'm going to go ahead and drag that out. So again, add, and I'm going to drag out a div block. We can call this something fitting, so something like skills. And let's apply the flex settings once we have our buttons in there. So I'm going to go ahead and drag out a button, and we can style this however we'd like. So here we go. Let's call this skill, and let's see, what are some main points of this? Okay, so we have an outline, we have rounded corners, we have text in the middle, and we have a bunch of sort of like padding around, or no, inside the button itself. So let's emulate that. Let me call this HTML. And let's start. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is make the font size a little bit bigger. So I'll make that maybe 18 pixels. And I'll adjust the height accordingly as well. We can also add some more padding. So I'll do that as well. Right now by default it's at 15, but I'm gonna bump it up to, let's say, 20, and actually maybe a little bit more, so 22 on this side, some more on the top, so let's say 12 and 12, and then I'll go ahead and give it that rounded corner look. So we're gonna scroll all the way down, and I'll just up this, let's say 50%. That's too much. How about 15 pixels? Too little. 20 pixels. Still too much. I think we need to add some more padding though. So I'm going to go ahead and up this to 30 instead. There. And then, or maybe I'll make it 28. Again, design is a lot about playing around. Webflow makes it really easy. You can see your changes in real time. Unlike with code where there'd have to be a lot of back and forth, here you can just sort of tweak to your heart's content, pretty much. Okay, 25 looks good to me. Okay, perfect. Now we can change that background color. Oops, I'm gonna go ahead and make it something like this. That might be too dark. Let me bring it up a little bit, and then I'll make the text color itself a little darker. So go ahead and grab it and make it the same as this one right here. Ooh, we might have to change that background a little bit. Okay, perfect. I like that. And we'll add a border. So 1 pixels, maybe 2. Yeah, no, 1 looks good. And again, use that eyedropper tool. Grab this. Okay, perfect. So now we can just duplicate this a couple times. CSS, Webflow, JavaScript, and that's a Python. Okay. So now we have our different buttons. Now to style them, like I said before, we're going to use Flex to lay it out. So I can grab this parent div called skills, and I'm going to go ahead and up here next to layout where it says display, I'm going to hit display flex. And the first thing I actually want to create is a gap between all of these elements. So I'm going to up that gap maybe a little bit. Maybe I'll make it 16. Oh, that's too much. How about 10 pixels? Okay, 10 pixels looks good. I'll actually add more skills here. Now, okay, let me show you what just happened. So I have this skill called Python, right? All I'm doing right now is just copying and pasting. Now here, I've gotten to a point where there's like too many Pythons, right? Now, if I add another one, guess what happens? While it's being added, like you can see here that it's being added as I paste it, but you can't see it anymore. Like it just stopped, right? Well, Flexbox by default isn't wrapping all of those elements inside. It isn't wrapping it and bringing it onto the next line. So how we fix that problem is by grabbing our parent div, and here in Flex settings where it says direction, instead of just hitting the normal horizontal arrow, we're gonna hit this drop down icon, and we're gonna go and we're gonna hit wrap down, and that should bring our skills down here. So I'll just add a couple more of these Pythons, and okay, perfect. So those are my skills, right? And I have them written down now. I think what I'm gonna do is make the gap a little bit bigger, so something like 12 pixels. And if you want to adjust the gap individually, so make a different horizontal gap and make a different vertical gap, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna hit this lock icon, and then I can change it. So I think column wise I'm gonna go 10 pixels. So column wise means between like these two, yeah. And then for row wise I might make it a little bit bigger, so I'll make that 14. So row wise is from up to down like that way. Yep. Okay, perfect. Now that we have our skills, okay, one small thing, I feel like this heading and these skills are a little bit too close together, so what I can do is grab it, and up top at this at the spacing option, I can give it a margin, because remember margin is space on the outside, so I can give it a margin of, let's say, 20 pixels, and maybe a little bit more, 24. Okay, great. Now time to create the little hover interaction. So we actually don't even need the interactions panel for this, since we're just moving it up by a little bit. We can go ahead and do it right in the designer itself. So just grab any of these buttons, and what you're gonna do is up here next to the class, you're gonna hit this drop down arrow, and it should bring you to a different this menu that says states, and you should click hover. So basically what this is saying is while the interactions panel might mess with JavaScript and add JavaScript interactions, what the style selector and hitting this hover state allows you to do is use CSS animations instead. So basically all you need to know is if it's anything related to the styling of the product, like if it's like changing the font size or changing the font color or changing the background of the button, whatever it is, you can do it using CSS interactions. If you want a little bit more preciseness, yeah, precision, oh my god, preciseness. If you want a little more precision, you can definitely go ahead and use that interactions panel, but for example's sake, and also because this is definitely geared towards beginners, I'm going to stick to just using CSS interactions. Okay, so let's get into it. Now I'll open up this hover menu, and as you can see, a lot of our properties here, they have this orange tint to them, the ones that we've modified. And all that's saying is that these fonts have a set value in the normal state, so that you know that, like for example, if I change the font and if I change the font color and I make it much lighter, something like this, you can see that blue icon, right? So now what it's going to do is if you click off of this hover thing, you can see that it'll go right back to being that dark purple, but then when you hover on top, it changes, right? So it's just letting you know that there's been a change made. So we're going to go ahead and go back to our hover state, because that's not what we want to modify. We want to actually move the button itself up a little bit. And how we're going to do that is by scrolling down and going down here to effects. Underneath effects, there's a property called 2D and 3D transforms. Now, if you open this up, you'll see that it lets you do a bunch of different cool things, like moving, scaling, rotating, and skewing. This is all really fun, but for today, we're just going to stick to moving. So what we want to do is move the button up by a little bit, so that we can achieve by using this Y property. So I'm just going to say move it up 20 pixels, negative 20 pixels. That will make it move up. That might be a little bit too much. How about we try negative 15, right? So now when we hover, we can see it. Now, this animation is a little bit more harsh, I would say, right? It's not very smooth, and I think it works for this type of transition or this type of interaction where we're just having it move up. But let's say, for example, say that I didn't want to have it move up, so I'm just gonna delete that for now. And let's say that I just wanted to change the background color. Maybe I wanted to deepen it, right? So I would go ahead and I would change it here, right? So let's say that I brought down I just inverted it, like I made the background color this dark one, and I went ahead and I changed the font color to be this lighter color, if this was what my desired effect was. Oh, in the border, can't forget about that. In the border, then you can see that this is a little bit too harsh, at least for my liking. I would like to make it something smoother. So there's a really easy way to do that. You're gonna grab your button and you're gonna select it, right? And you need to make sure that you're not in the hover state. So if you're in the hover state, this won't work. You can't add a transition when you're in a state that isn't the normal one. So you're just gonna get rid of that. Okay, you're gonna get on your normal state and you're gonna scroll all the way down to where it says transitions. It's also under effects, it's right underneath transforms. And what it'll let you do is it'll let you pick the property, right? So pick the specific property that you want to add a transition to. Now I have multiple properties. I changed the border color, I changed the background color, and I changed the font color, right? So I can't really pick one property. I kind of need to pick all of them, right? Well, there's a way to do that too. All you're gonna do is you're just gonna scroll down this menu, right? And at the bottom, it says advanced, and it says all properties. So you're gonna go ahead and just click that. Now, you can modify the duration and the easing as well. Usually I like to leave these as they are, but you can definitely go ahead and it opens up a huge easing editor. You can spend lots of time looking through this. Now, if you were to do the same interaction in the interactions panel, you would definitely get a lot more control, but this is definitely easier if you're just starting out and you don't want that much customization. So I would pick all properties, 200 milliseconds sounds fine, and that easing sounds fine as well. So now we can go ahead and try it out. Now, as you can see, there's a little smooth interaction. I might actually make it last a little bit longer. Let's try 300. There we go. Yep. Okay, I might actually keep this actually. So what I'm gonna do is I'll keep this and I'll go back to the hover state because I still want to move my button up a little bit. So I'm going to go back to the hover state, and underneath transforms, I'll just go and make it 15 pixels. So now it's like a smooth interaction. Okay, perfect. So that's how you would use flex and wrap your elements, and also use interactions without ever using the interactions panel. Great, now the final part is going to be creating this last section using CSS grid. What is CSS grid? Now, unlike Flexbox, CSS grid organizes content into rows and columns. It helps organize content in 2 directions, not just one. So while Flexbox, you could think of it kind of like a bookshelf, everything is going in one direction, CSS grid is a little bit different. You can think of it kind of like a chessboard. Things are going in both directions. So let's go ahead and implement this. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to reuse that section that we had. So I'm just going to go ahead and drag out another div block, and oops, that one kind of opened, and I'll call this section as well, right? And what we're going to do, actually, oops, I think we need to give these sections a little bit of margin. So I'm going to do like 30 pixels on top and another 30 pixels on the bottom. Okay, perfect. And let me just copy and paste this section heading. So I'll place it in here, and we can call this projects this time. Okay, great. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up the div that's going to hold these different project cards. This is going to be our CSS grid div. So I'm going to grab it, and I'm going to call it grid. Let's call it maybe 3 call grid, be a little more specific, because we're adding 3 columns. So we're going to go here to display, and we're going to hit grid. Now Webflow makes it really simple, okay? So the direction of our grid is going to be, again, horizontal, so we have that down packed. We can pick how many columns and how many rows. I know that I'm only going to have 1 row, so I can just click that down arrow. And then I know that I want 3 columns, so that's how many columns I'm going to have. Now, if you want to edit it in a more sort of visual way, you can hit this, and this will give you a little bit more control about the size of each of the columns and how they work. So let me explain really quickly what all this stuff means. Now, automatically, if you have content that extends beyond this first initial row of your grid, so for example, if instead of 3 cards I had 4, CSS grid will automatically create an auto row for you, and it will automatically make another row of content and have it still be in that thing. Now, if you remember, Flexbox didn't do that. If you had more content than and you didn't have that wrap property applied, then it would just spill over, right? So CSS grid has that distinct feature. So as you can see, by default, when you add columns, it gives it this weird unit. It's not pixels, it's not anything. It says FR. Let me zoom in real quick. It says FR. Now, FR stands for fraction, okay? And essentially what it means is you have 3 columns, and each of them are 1 fraction of the screen. So that means that each, or 1 fraction of your parent container. Now, what that means is that each column becomes essentially 1/3 of your entire container, right? So you have each of them representing 1 fractional unit of your entire container. So then it gets split into 3, and it becomes 1/3, right? So now as you add more columns, you can see that the width of those columns is decreasing to account for the addition of another space. Now, if, for example, let's say I had 2 columns and I wanted to make the first one significantly bigger. So let's say that I wanted to make the first one take up 75% of the screen and the second one take up only 25%. It's really easy to do that using using CSS grid. So instead of having 1 FR, what I'm going to type in is I'm going to type in 0.75 FR. And if I don't change the second one, you can see how the 0.75 the 0.75 FR column is a little bit less smaller than the 1 FR column. But then if I go ahead and change it around, There you go. So now this gives you that desired layout, but we don't really want that. So I'm gonna go back to this 1FR and I'll add my 3 columns back because I want them to be equal. And okay, one final thing that we can change is increase the gap between these two, because I feel like this is too little of a gap. So I'm gonna go ahead, right now it's at 16 pixels, but I think I might bring it up to, let's say, 30. So I'm just gonna keep dragging. Now you have a pretty good visual layout. We can come back to this sort of this view in a minute once we have our actual content in. It'll help looking at it, make looking at it a lot easier. So I'll just escape out of this, and we can go ahead and we can add our elements. So okay, so here's what we're gonna need to create. We need to create a div block, a sort of grouping that's gonna hold each of these card elements, right? So each card has what? It has a heading, an image, and it has some paragraph text, right? So what we need to do is we need to create a div block that's gonna hold those 3 things for each of our cards. So I'm gonna grab this, I'm gonna grab a div. As you can see, it gets automatically sort of put into that designated grid like space, and I'm gonna call this card. Okay, so this card is gonna hold our heading, so I'm gonna drag out a heading into this card, and we can make this in each 3, and I can call this whatever before intro to Webflow. So there's our heading, and we can mess with this. So I'm gonna go ahead and make it normal instead of that bold, and the color is fine. The rest of it is fine. I'm not too concerned about that. So there we go. There's a heading. We should probably rename this. So I'm gonna call this card heading, and then we can go ahead and grab an image. So I have one over. I'm just gonna reuse the same image from before. Again, feel free to use your own. Okay, great. So let's call this image card image, and then we can add our paragraph text, and I'm just gonna get rid of some of this because we don't really need all of it. Okay, perfect. The last thing I'll do is mess with the settings on this paragraph. I'll make it a little bit bigger, let's say 16 pixels, and I'll up the height accordingly too. And that looks good. So let me rename this as well, call it card pair. Okay, so now what we can do is we can grab this card element and we can just copy and paste it 2 times, and that'll fit right into our little project grid that we have going for us. Now, in my opinion, this image is a little bit too big, right? So what can I do? Well, I can go ahead and I can change the height on it. So let's say I can make it 300 pixels instead, right? This is a little bit too big, so I'm gonna go back down to, let's say, 150. Now, here's the issue. When you move it back to 150, you're leaving the width here at auto, right? So what is that width doing? It's automatically adjusting the width to maintain the aspect ratio of the image to make sure that it doesn't get squished, basically, using the height that you specified. So now that I've specified a height of 150 pixels, and I'm saying, okay, like, I just need the height to be this, I don't care what the width is, just adjust it accordingly, right? So that's why the width of it is going down. Now, I could keep it like this, but I'm not going to. Now what I am gonna do is now, if I wanted the width of this image to take up the whole entire card, what I could do is I could go into this width setting, and instead of specifying a defined amount, something like in pixels, because like obviously screen sizes are going to change, right? And the size of these cards are going to change as well. So for example, if I go into preview mode, I can show you. So the size of these cards is changing, as you can tell, right? So to fix that, to not have to set a defined size, what we can do is set the width to be 100%. But this doesn't look very appealing, right? The image is sort of squished, and this is a problem that I'm going to show you how to fix in just a minute. But let's say, okay, you're willing to compromise on the width. You're willing to say, okay, like, I don't care what the width is, right? But maybe you just want your elements to be sort of centered, right? Again, easy way to do that. Now, here's where we're going to incorporate both grid and flex. So I'm going to grab any of my card elements. It could be any of them because, again, they all have the same class. So all the style changes that you make on one are going to apply on all of them. So I'll grab the card element and I'll display it to be flex. Now by default, the direction is going to be horizontal, but you want to make it vertical. So I make it vertical like that. Now, by default, you can see even though I went back and I changed the width to be auto, it's a Flexbox still somehow made it. Flexbox still somehow made the image expand to be the size of the container, right? Well, that's because by default, if you look here in these align settings, at X, it says stretch, because that's what Flexbox usually does. It takes all your elements and it stretches them to fill that size of the container. But let's say instead of being stretched, I just want it to be centered in the middle. So there we go. That's all we need to do. Just center it in the middle. And then between the images, I'm going to give it a little bit of a gap. So I'll say maybe like 2 pixels of a gap. That looks good. Yep, and that creates a little bit of a visual distinction between each of these. Now, the final thing I'm going to do is really quickly add a border to this image. So I can go down and I can add a 1 pixel border. I'll just pick any color. Let's see. This one? Okay, perfect. Not sure. Probably need to pick a lighter color. Yes, okay, perfect. So that's how you would do it if you didn't really care what the width of the image size was. But I really wanted to be like taking up this much space. Like I want to define the size of both the width and the height without messing it up and making it squishy, right? Well, for this, we're going to need to do something a little bit more complex. We're going to need to use a different CSS property. So what I'm going to do first, I'm just going to go to width here and I'll set the width to be 100%. It's going to be squished, right? But we're going to fix this. We're just going to scroll all the way down, and here underneath custom properties, there's a little add button. So you're going to click that add button, and this is a special CSS property. It's called object fit. And what it's going to do is it's going to take this image and it's going to treat the sort of height and width properties that I've given to the image as its box, and it's going to take the image itself and stretch it or compress it to fit in the confines of that box and still maintain its aspect ratio. So it might scale the image a little bit to make sure that it still fits and isn't smushed, so that I don't have to worry about doing that myself. So this property is going to be called object fit, is here. If we type in our value and we type in cover, what cover is going to do is it's going to try, again, like I said, it's going to scale the image to fit the confines of the box without messing the aspect ratio up. So there we go. Now our image is perfect. And that's it. In this video, we covered a lot. We used CSS Grid, we used buttons, and we even added some simple interaction, and we also learned about specific CSS properties. You guys now have a solid foundation to start customizing this site and many other sites in Webflow yourself. If you found this helpful, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more tutorials. And if you want to learn Webflow in an interactive, hands-on way, check out nocodeher.org, where we teach young girls how to use no-code tools like Webflow in a live workshop setting. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.